We will go ahead and get started. This webinar is being recorded, so if you miss anything, it'll be available after the fact. Today, we're talking about the invisible toll, trauma, and stress in worker and employer wellness, featuring Dr. Marty Gillen. She is a professor and extension specialist from the Department of Family, Youth, and Community Sciences at the University of Florida. This webinar will discuss how trauma and ongoing stress affect both workers and employers in agricultural communities, and participants will gain practical insight into common impacts, why these issues matter for the long-term sustainability of agricultural operations, and how trauma-informed approaches can support safer, more stable, and effective workplaces. Dr. Gillen, her extension programs focus on trauma-informed practices in extension, childhood trauma, trust-based relational intervention, and personal and family financial planning. The way that this webinar will work is Dr. Gillen will provide her presentation for the most part. Throughout the presentation, if you have any questions or if she prompts you to provide chat or any feedback, please put it in the Q&A feature and you'll be responded to throughout the presentation from her prompts. And if you have any questions on the presentation as a whole, we'll answer those at the end of the presentation. And with that, I will hand things over to Dr. Gillen.
Thank you. Let me get this shared. Okay, Carly, can you confirm that you can see it?
Yes, I can see it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone, and thank you again for being here today. As Carly said, my name is Marty Gillen. I'm a professor here at the University of Florida. And today we're going to talk about something that goes often unspoken, especially in agricultural communities, the invisible toll of chronic stress and trauma. Agriculture is demanding work, whether someone's working in the field, whether they're managing operations, employees, running the family operation, transporting goods, or making, financial decisions. Those pressures can be enormous. You think long hours, financial uncertainty, labor shortages, you throw in weather events, injuries, and really that constant unpredictability of agricultural work and how that affects both workers but also the employers. So today's webinar is going to take a whole workplace perspective. We're going to explore how stress and trauma can affect safety, communication, productivity, decision making, worker retention, also while discussing practicable trauma-informed approaches that can support healthier and more sustainable workplaces. So I'd like for you to think just for a couple seconds about one word that describes how you're feeling right now. You can put that in the Q&A or you can just kind of think about it to yourself. But what is one word that describes how you're feeling right now? Seeing busy in the Q&A. I often hear I'm stressed, see rushed. So I think a lot of us, I see an okay, that's great, Brian. Excited to hear what I have to say today, Rebecca. I hope it can help you. You take away some tools. Seeing a good. Yeah, it's coming up on a long weekend. Some of us may be planning family time and trying to kind of get out of the workplace and go into that. Maybe some of you even took off a day early for that to turn it into a 4-day weekend. So, you think about, how we're feeling. And I think sometimes we oftentimes, and even Carly and I did this when we got on the webinar. She said, "How are you doing?" I said, "Oh, I'm good. How are you?" And she said, "Oh, I'm good." That might have been accurate for both of us. It may have not have been accurate for either one of us. So I think sometimes too often in life we go through saying, "Oh, how are you?" just kind of as that pleasantry like we often do, and our general answer is good. We don't often take the time to stop and be like, "Gosh, I don't feel so good. There's something else going on here today." Or, maybe I do feel overwhelmed or stressed, or maybe I am having a great day and I really want to share how great it is versus just kind of the good. But I always like to start all of my, whether it's a workshop presentation, a webinar, whether I'm teaching undergrads at UF, whatever it is, I center all of my classes on an exercise that can kind of help us ground us. And if we're not so great, maybe help us relax our nervous system a little bit and help us get ready to take in information and to learn and kind of be a part of the actual webinar. So I like on YouTube the Calm channel. There's tons of free exercises that you can do. So you could pull them up on your phone and do them. It's something you could put into a presentation yourself. And I really like this one in particular because it is a wonderful grounding activity that, again, you can do just spur of the moment, doesn't cost anything. You don't have to have anything with you to do it. So we're going to take just a second and do this activity. And when you're thinking about this as a grounding activity, actually going through those 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 things is interacting the cortex part of your brain. So that's helping us to be able to regulate and calm down when we have to go into that cortex part. It truly is helping to ground us and bring us back into the thinking part of the brain. And we'll talk a little bit about that too as we go along. And I always tell people when you get to the part of this and it says, name the two things that you can smell. You're like, oh my gosh, what do I smell? You can always like pull your shirt collar up and take a smell of that because that scent is comforting to us because it's a familiar scent. So it does help to regulate us. So by the end of the webinar, we're going to hopefully go through and you'll understand how trauma and chronic stress affects workers and employers in the agricultural setting. So my hope is that you leave with this better understanding of how this affects both the workers and the employers and what that really looks like on day-to-day impacts and operations, as well as practical ways to create safer and healthier workplace environments. So, this presentation is not about diagnosing people or labeling reactions as weaknesses or you becoming a mental health counselor or anything like that. Instead, it's about understanding how stress affects the brain, the body, relationships, and workplace functioning so we can respond more effectively. So, when we think about why this topic matters, one important thing to recognize is that agriculture often involves layers of chronic stress rather than isolated stressful events. So, whether you consider that from the worker or the employer standpoint, both may be dealing with financial pressures, unpredictable weather, physical exhaustion, staffing shortages, family responsibilities, all at the same time. And unlike some professions where stress kind of fluctuates, agricultural stress can feel constant, and seasonal cycles may intensify that pressure. There can also be strong cultural expectations around toughness, independence, and pushing through hardship, which sometimes really makes it difficult for people to seek support or openly talk about stress. But when stress becomes chronic, it can begin affecting physical health, emotional regulation, communication, decision making, and workplace safety. And when you start looking at it as chronic stress, that truly is getting into that trauma level. And we know that ag consistently ranks among the most stressful occupations. And again, like I said, there's so much that goes into that. So when we think about the word trauma, when people often hear that word, they often think about some type of catastrophic event. But trauma can also result from prolonged exposure to overwhelming stress, repeated losses, injuries, uncertainty, or just unsafe conditions that are overwhelming that person. Chronic stress keeps the body's stress response system activated over really long periods of time. And you've got all of these hormones and cortisol and stuff that's firing off within these systems. And those systems are meant to protect us for a short period of time. It's like we smell fire, for example, and we know we need to figure out where the fire is coming from. We need to call 911. We need to get out of that situation. And your adrenaline and all of that's going to kick in to help you get through that situation and to escape that fire. But when that stress response keeps happening over time, that constant activation affects sleep, concentration, mood, patience, memory, and our physical health. Trauma responses are not signs that someone is weak. They're adaptive survival responses from when that nervous system is trying to keep that person safe. It's just not ending. It's in that chronic state. And we can also have secondary trauma, and that's stress reactions from witnessing or hearing about the trauma that someone else has experienced. So, when we think about agricultural stress, it's important to recognize that many stressors are layered, and again, they're ongoing rather than temporary stressors. So, for example, you may have a producer who may be carrying financial pressure and concerns about weather conditions while also dealing with labor shortages, equipment problems, and long work hours. Workers may be facing physical exhaustion, injury risks, transportation concerns, family separation, maybe uncertainty about housing and income. And then in some communities, people are coping with repeated exposure to hurricanes, droughts. We have lots of droughts going on right now in Florida. Could be an area that's had extensive flooding, crop loss, livestock illness. Over time, again, these repeated exposures to these stressors can affect emotional regulation, concentration, relationships, and again, our physical health. And another important point is that stress impacts everyone across the operation. Employers, supervisors, workers, and family members may all be carrying significant stress at the same time, which can again influence communication and workplace dynamics. When stress becomes chronic and unresolved, people may be functioning in survival mode rather than in a place of flexibility, patience, and problem solving. And they may not even realize that they're functioning in that survival mode because it truly has gone on so long. I wanted to share some data from the 2025 Mind Your Melon, the Farmer Wellbeing Survey, because I think it truly does set a foundation for this type of discussion. So this is focused on Florida farmers and ranchers. And these findings, they truly highlight just how significant stress and emotional strain have become within agricultural communities. First, the prevalence of emotional distress is striking. 67% of Florida farmers and ranchers reported feeling sad or depressed, while 63% reported feeling nervous or worried about the future. That means that the majority of respondents are carrying significant emotional stress on a regular basis. Researchers also found that approximately 9% of agricultural workers experienced suicidal thoughts at least once in the past 3 months. And almost 3% experience suicidal thoughts monthly or more often. These numbers remind us that mental health challenges in agriculture are not rare and isolated. They're real, serious, and affecting many individuals and families. When participants were asked about major stressors, they identified issues that many in agriculture know all too well: natural disasters, weather uncertainty, saving for retirement, balancing work and home life, market instability, and feeling misunderstood by the broader public. Many of these stressors are ongoing and outside of a person's control, which contributes to that chronic stress and emotional exhaustion. Financial concerns were also a major theme. 30% worried about being unable to provide for their family. 40% reported unexpected financial burdens, and another 30% reported difficulties managing debt. Financial stress does not stay separate from workplace wellness. It affects sleep, relationships, concentration, decision making, and overall mental health. Finally, nearly one-third of participants reported experiencing loneliness. This is especially important because isolation can increase stress and reduce opportunities, support, and connection. These findings really reinforce why conversations about trauma, chronic stress, and workplace wellness are so important in agricultural communities. It's simply not about just the individual coping. These are systemic pressures affecting workers, employers, families, and entire communities. So when we think about how our brains and our bodies react to stress, again, those brains, bodies are designed to respond to danger, just like the example of I gave if you smelled smoke. When stress levels rise, the nervous system shifts into survival mode. You may have heard of fight, flight, or freeze responses. These are protective responses meant to help people survive threats. Now, the challenge is that chronic stress keeps the body activated for long periods of times. Over time, again, that affects concentration, patience, memory, sleep, reaction times, decision making. And in workplace settings, this may show up as increased mistakes, irritability, emotional outbursts, difficulty communicated, or trouble focusing on safety procedures. So, understanding how these reactions through a trauma-informed lens helps us shift from asking, what's wrong with this person, to asking what stressors might be affecting this person's ability to function right now. What's actually going on with this person, and how can I help them? So, a little more about the brain. So, the brain develops from a bottom-up structure. And our downstairs brain, which is often also referred to as our survival brain, allows us to act before we think. This is where your fear, flight, freeze response comes in, your emotional responses, your bodily functions, all of that comes in at this downstairs part of the brain. And then you have your upstairs part of the brain. This is the part that allows us to think before we act. It allows us to kind of take that breath and think about what we're getting ready to say before it actually comes out. So if you have ever stuck your foot in your mouth, you've said something, you're like, gosh, I thought that, but the words really did come out, and I didn't mean to do that. You were in your downstairs part of your brain. Again, your upstairs allows you to think before you act. It's where our good decision-making skills are. It's where we have control over our emotions, our body, focus, concentration, all of that would be in the upstairs part of the brain. Our empathy is in our upstairs part of the brain, as is our self-awareness. So what I'm doing, how is that affecting someone else, and my ability to understand that? Again, the brain develops from a bottom up. So for males, the brain is not fully developed to the mid to upper 20s. And for females, your early 20s to mid 20s is when brains are fully developed. And what I mean by fully developed, again, it develops from that bottom up structure. So the downstairs part of the brain develops before the upstairs part of the brain. So those higher order skills are later in coming. So, you think about maybe some of you all have children like I do, and maybe you've got the teenager and they've done something and you're like, gosh, they know better than that. Why on earth did they did it? And maybe you've even asked them why, and their response is, I don't know. They're telling the truth. They don't know. That brain's not fully developed. So when you think about impulse control, all of that, it's not fully there. And that's an absence of any trauma, any stress. I also wanted to share a simple model of the brain too that's called the flip the lid, the hand model of the brain. This is by Dr. Dan Siegel. So if everybody will hold up a hand with me, we are going to pretend that this is your brain. We're going to pretend that your forearm is your spinal cord and your wrist is your brain stem. And while I can't see anybody, I trust that everybody's breathing okay and you're taking a breath when you need to, but you're not saying, okay, I need to take another breath. It's just a bodily function that naturally occurs. And that's at the brain stem level, just like our ability to regulate our temperature. All of that would be at that brain stem level. If you take your thumb and put that into your palm, we're going to pretend that that thumb is the amygdala part of the brain. That is your survival part of the brain. And that is what I was talking about would be your downstairs part of the brain. So this is where your fear, flight, freeze response comes in. And if you take your fingers and you fold them over, so you've kind of got like a little fist made with your thumb tucked in under the fingers, we're going to pretend that those fingers are your cortex part of your brain. And each fingernail is part of the prefrontal cortex. Again, this is where all of your reasoning comes in, your good logic, your ability to make good decisions, your ability to think before you react to something. But I'll tell you, and I'm a fairly regulated person who teaches this stuff a lot, but I can still have this response. Does anybody ever get hangry? I know I personally do. And when I get hangry, what happens is I flip my lid. So I'm no longer operating with my brain fully intact. I have flipped my lid and I'm operating down here at survival brain. I can feel my patience getting less. My tone may get a little sharper. I may be a little short in my comments. And I'll tell you, my husband, and we've been married, it'll be 28 years in June. He'll be like, when was the last time you ate something? Or maybe he would just slide that jar of peanut butter kind of down the counter to me with a spoon. And I know what that means now. And again, I'm a fairly regulated adult. But oftentimes we go through life and we go through the day and we're really, really busy. And sometimes we forget that we actually need to take care of ourselves, like the hangry example, that I need to make sure I am eating and staying hydrated and all of that, because that affects my ability to think and reason and affects my interactions with other people. And again, this is me as a fairly regulated adult who teaches this stuff for a living and does research in this area, and I can still flip my lid and be hangry, and it affects me. So when you throw on other stressors and all of that added onto this, if I'm staying in that chronic stress, I may be operating down here at the amygdala level quite a bit and not even realize I'm doing it. And the more I stay down here, the easier it's going to be for me to be down here because it's going to be my go-to versus me having the closed lid and somebody says something to me and I, take a few breaths before I respond and actually kind of think to myself about my response. If I'm down here, it just may cause me to flip that lid and something comes out that's a much shorter, harsher response than what I intended. And again, that's just some basic brain science. And, all of our experiences throughout our life builds those brains. And some people have had great experiences, and other experiences have not been so great. And they have, in fact, damaged some of those connections within there as well. So when we look at how stress shows up in workers, so stress responses can show up in many different ways. Some workers may become more irritable or reactive. Others may shut down, withdraw, appear disconnected. But again, oftentimes when we're under stress, we're operating down here at that amygdala level. So you may notice an increase in mistakes, reduced concentration, absenteeism, physical complaints, changes in mood or communication. It's important to recognize that these reactions are often connected to stress overload rather than a lack of work ethic or motivation. In many agricultural communities, people feel pressure to keep working no matter how overwhelmed they feel. Some workers may also avoid talking about stress because they fear judgment, stigma, concerns about job security. So that's why it's really important to create psychologically safer workplaces because they truly do matter. So when you look at it for employers and managers, our employers and managers often carry enormous responsibility. They may be worrying about payroll, production, weather conditions, regulations, staffing shortages, financial survival of the operation, while also supporting employees and family members. Over time, that can lead to decision fatigue, burnout, chronic worry, sleep difficulties, emotional exhaustion. Stress at that leadership level can also influence workplace culture. When leaders are overwhelmed, communication may become shorter, more reactive, less patient, which can increase tension across the workplace. Trauma-informed approaches are not just for employees. Leadership wellness matters too because stressed leaders often lead stressed workplaces. So when workplaces are operating under high levels of chronic stress, the impacts are often visible across the organization. Stress can contribute to increased accidents, reduced communication, higher turnover, lower morale, and difficulty retaining workers. Teams may struggle with conflict, misunderstandings, or inconsistent performance. So, this is why trauma informed workplace practices matter. Supporting wellness is not separate from productivity and sustainability. Healthy workplaces tend to have stronger communication, safer practices, and better retention. So, investing in workplace wellness is both a human issue, but it's also a business issue. So, one of the biggest challenges is that many people do not feel comfortable asking for help. In agricultural communities, there's often strong cultural values around independence, endurance, and pushing through hardship. People may worry about appearing weak or becoming a burden to others. There may also be practical barriers, including transportation, cost, lack of providers. There could be language barriers, scheduling issues, or limited access to mental health services, especially in our rural areas. But I'll say, it's a lot of limited access to services in general, definitely in rural areas, but even if I look at the Gainesville area and look at the mental health providers there, if you have insurance, that's great, but there's very few mental health providers that actually take insurance. And if you go for mental health counseling, for example, from a licensed mental health counselor, they may not take insurance, and you could be looking at $150 on up for about a 50-minute session. And that's a huge barrier. So we have to do what we can to find resources, but also, it really starts with reducing that stigma. You know, one thing is helping people to get resources, but if they won't talk about what they need, then you can actually get to the resource side of it. So reducing stigma starts with normalizing conversations about stress and recognizing that mental wellness is part of the overall workplace wellness. So when we talk about trauma-informed workplaces, we're not talking about turning employers into therapists by any means. A trauma-informed approach simply means understanding that stress and trauma affect how people function, and then building workplace practices that support safety, predictability, respect, and communication. So this can include things like clear expectations, respectful supervision, consistent routines, opportunities for breaks, and supportive responses after difficult events. So, trauma informed practices help reduce unnecessary stress and create environments where people are better able to succeed, which is then going to help the overall organization. So, many trauma informed workplace strategies are practical and achievable. And a lot of them, they don't really cost any money either. For examples, workers generally function better when expectations are clear. Communication is respectful and routines are predictable. Even small improvements in communication can reduce confusion and workplace tension. Supporting basic physical needs also matters. Access to hydration, nutrition, shade, rest breaks, and recovery time can improve both wellness and safety. And I'll tell you, hydration is as important as making sure we're eating. Just like I was talking about, when I get hangry, that affects my mood and my ability to communicate and all of that. If I am dehydrated, that also affects my mood, my concentration, and my ability to communicate and all of that as well. And we're oftentimes dehydrated and we don't even realize it. By the time we realize that we're thirsty, we've actually lost 10% of our cognitive functioning. And like I said, we're fairly dehydrated regularly. So, truly encouraging people to take those water breaks and making sure that's readily available is huge, especially in agricultural work. So, trauma-informed workplaces are not about lowering standards at all. It's about creating environments that help people function at their best, which again is going to help that organization succeed. Another thing about is what we bring with us to the workplace. And this is whether we're in leadership, an owner, a worker, but moods are contagious. And the research actually shows that bad moods are more infectious than good. So if I've had a rough morning and I come in with a bad mood, it's going to affect my coworkers. And they may actually start to turn them into having a bad mood based on how I'm doing. So I'm not saying we need to all be excited and happy all of the time. That's not going to work. But we do need to make sure we understand how this stuff works. And what we're bringing into the workplace does not leave us when we come in through the door. Lots of people used to would say, and you'll probably still have some employers that would say this in management too, that nope, you're coming to the workplace, leave what you had at the door and don't bring the baggage with you. But in fact, we know that all of our experiences from those days, including all of our life, is coming with us in that invisible backpack wherever we go. And that affects our interactions and all of that with folks. So we need to make sure we understand that how we interact with people and our relationship with people is based on our life experiences, including even when we were little. All of that lays that foundation for how we are today. So, when we think about building resilience in agricultural communities, resilience does not mean ignoring stress. Resilience is often misunderstood as simply being tough or pushing through stress without help. In reality, resilience is strengthened through support, connection, flexibility, and access to resources. People tend to cope better when they feel connected to others, supported in their workplaces and their communities. In agricultural communities, peer support, strong relationships, and collaborative problem solving can make a significant difference. Even small acts of support and communication can help reduce isolation and improve morale. So, leadership plays a major role in shaping workplace culture. When leaders model healthy communication, check in with workers, and normalize conversations about stress, it helps to reduce stigma and create safer environments. Simple actions such as asking workers how they are doing and actually truly wanting to listen to how they're doing versus the polite conversation you have and you say, "Oh, how are you?" And the person says good. And they say, "Well, how are you?" And you say good. But an actual meaningful conversation. Responding respectfully during stressful situations and recognizing burnout early can improve morale and retention. People are more likely to stay in workplaces where they feel respected, valued, and supported. So, stress management starts with recognizing when stress levels are becoming overwhelming. Many people underestimate how much physical needs affect emotional regulation and workplace functioning. Again, hydration, sleep, nutrition, movement, and rest are all foundational needs. Connection also matters. Again, isolation tends to increase stress, while supportive relationships can improve coping and resilience. Seeking help early is important. People don't have to wait until they're in crisis before accessing support. So, really thinking about how we can have these ongoing conversations from leadership down to support leadership, workers, and everyone across that organization at all of the levels. So, I've got a few questions for you to consider, and you're welcome. Let's take this first one, and you can put this in the Q&A. But what stressors are most common in your workplace or your community? Any stressors in your workplace or your community? I know there's stressors out there. So I see financial stressors, weather events, budgeting, securing grants, personnel, gas, program funds, food, healthcare. Absolutely. And it seems like the cost of everything has just gone up astronomically. I was just telling my husband, I was like, how much gas is, how much food has gone up, all of this. We ordered pizza, which is pretty typical for us to have a pizza night on the weekend and, take away from having to cook at home. And my kids are 8 and 10, so they very much like having pizza. But this was with coupons and everything for pizza. It was $40 for the four of us. And I'm like, I remember when you used to be able to get pizza and like you could get one or two pizzas and it was definitely under $20. And sometimes with coupons, you could definitely get it around 15. I'm like, wow. And that wasn't for like an expensive pizza brand either. That was more of your basic pizzas. I see stretching the paycheck. Yes, going on with all of that. So much going on with the money and trying to figure out how to make, ends meet with everything. Definitely, our paychecks for most of us are not keeping up with the cost of goods that are going up. And that affects again from workers to leadership to owners, all of that. And then how do you think stress might be affecting communication or safety? And I gave a few examples of that, but if people are stressed, it definitely can hinder our decision making skills. So I see changes in structure in our workplace has some feeling unsettled. People are afraid to voice their issues because of job cuts. Absolutely. People are afraid to say they're struggling or they need help with something because they are oftentimes afraid that they'll just be like let go and will lose their job. Less likely to be empathetic and an active listener. And then what is one trauma-informed change that could improve workplace wellness? Is there anything that you've heard here today that you think, well, the organization I work for hasn't tried that, and maybe that would help? Or maybe my boss could do this one. See, genuine curiosity and care, check in with one another and take time to listen. Yeah, like I said, don't be like me and Carly this morning when we say, "How are you?" And I say, "Good." And I say, "Well, how are you doing?" And she says, "Good." Don't be us. Take the time to actually have conversations with your employees and, workers with each other and to have those meaningful conversations. Again, it's nice to say good morning, but if we're going to say how are you, we should truly mean it. It shouldn't just be that pleasantry that we're kind of trying to get through with. And I think a lot of us have been almost conditioned over the years that that's what we do. And do not just say fine if you're not. Tell people how you feel. I totally agree with that, Pamela. So I wanted to emphasize again that stress and trauma can affect entire workplace systems, not just individuals, and that agricultural communities face unique pressures, but supportive workplace practices can make a meaningful difference. And trauma-informed approaches help create environments where people feel safer, more respected, and better able to function effectively. And I think that feel safer is key. I often talk about felt safety. So it doesn't necessarily matter that the workplace has met all of these requirements with OSHA, for example, or different things, and it's been deemed to be safe. Your employees actually have to feel safe. So they have to feel like somebody actually cares about them at the workplace. And, I think some of that is a shift from where we think about, well, we're trying to keep all of this in like separate silos and we don't want to bring our feelings to work. But again, we've got that invisible backpack that comes with us wherever. And if we can help people feel safer, even in that workplace setting, that's going to help that organization achieve the goals as well. Because it's going to help with worker performance, it's going to help with retention of workers, that culture of the workplace, all of that. So it's a win-win for everyone. So again, those trauma-informed approaches, they help to create those environments that can truly help that organization thrive. And it's because those workers are thriving as well. So I would encourage you all, to think about just one practical step that you could take to improve wellness and support within your workplace, within your community, and kind of what that might look like. And like I said, so much of this stuff can be done for free. We often think, oh my gosh, this will take so many resources and the organization is already on a tight budget. But so much of this is really it's personal connections and just taking the time to truly value people and to help when they need help. And again, it's not that I'm the counselor from the workplace perspective, but I do care about my employees and I'm going to help to connect them to resources when they need them. And I'm going to have this workplace that, again, is very much holistic and wraps around that employee, not just for what they can do for the company, but for who they are. So I did come up with a couple pages, a couple slides that show some resources and support. I always like to highlight UF IFAS extension. I'm a little biased with that. I do have a formal extension appointment myself with teaching research and extension. And you think like Florida, we have extension offices in all 67 counties. They may offer different services, but there's lots of wonderful resources at our extension offices to help you from mental health perspectives as well, but just lots of great resources that I think people often don't think about extension having. And you look throughout the United States and there's extension offices in most of our states throughout the US that have resources as well. If you're looking for a health center, you can go to that community health center, and this is specific to Florida, but you can put in your zip code and it will help you connect to resources that are often lower cost resources as well. 211, I think some folks forget about this as a resource, but we can get Florida County specific information, tons of resources, but also mental health resources. The National Center for Farm Worker Health has a ton of free resources online as well. It could be some programming that you want to implement in the workplace. It could be just some materials that you want to share with your employees as resources, but lots of good resources there. NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, has a lot of wonderful free resources from support groups to education to just general mental health resources. And I'll tell you, we've seen this increase because, like, I live in Ocala, I work in Gainesville. One of the main NAMI offices is in Gainesville. And we saw a shift during COVID with some of the resources where instead of having people come in person to groups, they had a shift to online. So a lot of these places have stayed with some online offerings, if not all online offerings for some of these peer support groups. So when you think about our rural counties, for example, somebody might not be willing to drive to, say, Gainesville for an hour and a half to come to this support group, but they could hop onto it online for a little bit one evening a week. And this support group is not only for individuals who may have, stress, mental health, illness, different things like that, but it's also for caregivers to also offer support at that level. And again, it's also a lot of education resources too to better understand what someone may be going through. And again, it's free resources. If you're looking for crisis support, this 988, being able to text or call that, it's staffed 24/7 for immediate support. There's also a crisis text line for 24/7 crisis counseling via text. Again, another free resource. And then the Farm Aid Farmer Hotline is another one that has resources. You can look at the website too. They do have lots of handouts, educational resources, different things like that that can be shared with folks as well. And I think again, a lot of this is changing kind of that lens that we're looking through things and acknowledging that employees don't leave whatever it is they're dealing with at the door when they come into work. They don't leave it in the truck when they're walking onto the field to do their work for the day. It still comes with them. And if we can help support whatever that is, it's going to help that employee. But then, like I said, at the end of the day, it is going to help that business as well because it's going to help you to be able to retain employees, and it's going to help you to be able to meet those needs and help to build even that better kind of community. So we do have about 10 minutes left. So if anybody has any questions, anything you want to chat about, that Q&A should be open where you're able to put that in there.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions or comments, please put them in the Q&A. I had one question for you, Dr. Gillen.
Mhm.
So I liked your piece on being more meaningful with conversations with either your coworkers or your employers or
I know you
colleagues
didn't
or,
know I was going to give us as an example
oh
this morning,
yeah,
did you?
yeah, even though we got a little bit roasted. I am interested in this. And do you have any ideas or suggestions for maybe prompts or avenues to engage on a deeper level without being too pushy or too chatty? Just better ways to engage with colleagues, I guess.
Right. Like I said, we're not turning into mental health counselors at all. But, and I'm just as bad as anyone else. Like I said, we did it this morning, and I can't tell you the number of times I've walked down the hallway and had those quick conversations. And, we all have so much that's going on. But if, we could just take, it doesn't have to be a long amount of time, just a couple minutes to actually stand there. And if we're going to chat with somebody, to make it more meaningful. Obviously, we still want to do our hellos and stuff, and we may not have time to stop and chat. But when we are going to take the time to say, how are you doing, that we actually mean it. And, some of us do know more about what's going on within our work family and stuff too, that we can say, oh, well, how are the kids doing? Oh, I know you've got one graduating and getting ready to go to college. How's that going? Or I know you just had this happen. I'm so sorry that happened. Is there anything I can do to help? And obviously, some people will be more open to conversations and stuff too, but I think it's just showing more genuine care. And that goes, like I said, across all the levels, whether it's with colleagues or whether it's from, definitely needs to come from the leadership down too, because we definitely don't leave our stuff at the door when we come in.
Right. Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Gillen. I think that covers everything. We don't have any questions in the chat. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. If you have any questions after the webinar is over, feel free to email me or Dr. Gillen. Tomorrow, you'll receive an email with a link to the recording. We would love if you shared it with your colleagues to maybe make a more trauma-informed workplace, or just share the information. This was a very engaging and enlightening webinar, so I appreciate Dr. Gillen's time and everyone's time who joined today. You'll also receive a link to an evaluation survey in that follow-up email. We would very much appreciate it if you filled that survey out. It's very short and it helps us continue to find great speakers and make these impactful webinars for everyone. Thank you so much. And with that, I will stop recording.